Merchant took a knee by the little red body. "It's been a long time since I laid my eyes on a godling," he said. It was struggling to breathe, an easy observation thanks to the sharp hissing sound that escaped its bloody lips. Merchant pressed his fingers against the creature's ribs. "Ah! Quiet now. You have multiple broken ribs, but I don't think you'll die. I wouldn't usually do this." Merchant cut a swath of cloth from his tunic with a small knife. It would never have been enough to fit around a man's torso, but for godlings or besetas, it would suffice. The bindings sometimes keep mucus trapped in the lungs. Mucus produced by the inflammation of muscle and trapped blood, but luckily for you, I have something to help. He reached into his satchel and rummaged around until he found his bottle of nectar. Casimir was performing a quick perimeter check. When he returned to the clearing, looking tired and yellow, he said, "I followed their tracks to a blue stream. It seems they passed through it and absconded further into the forest. I found this." He held up the remains of a sundered crossbow. "Looks like they discarded it." Casimir removed his fur hat from his head and wrung it free of sweat. "It's hot," he said. "Hot for this time of year." Merchant uncorked the bottle of nectar. "It's not hot. That heat you're feeling is the rush of battle. It's the cold heat of murder, and the sweat is the sweat of fear. Have you ever killed before?" "No, I checked his body. The man the one with the hair, he's not moving." Merchant nodded along as he poured some of the nectar into the godling's lips. The godling licked the lid desperately. Casimir paused for a moment. His eyes, usually dark and full of kindness, were now dark and full of pain. Still alive, of course. The light hadn't faded by any means, but then, why would they? He wasn't the one who'd been reduced to pounds of meat. "I threw up back there." "That's okay." Merchant listened to the godling's laborious breathing. He listened to the sharp, shallow breaths become slow and calm, when suddenly, the godling rolled over onto both hands, opened his mouth and vomited. He covered the fresh grass in mucus, blood, and bone filament. He clutched at his red-skinned torso. No doubt, his quickly repairing lungs were pushing bravely against the wreck of his ribs. "The mucus should be gone, and the pain will reduce over time. I should be able to wrap this around your chest without too much suppression of the blood. Do you have a name, godling?" "Why'd you call him that?" asked Casimir. "He's a beseta, a spirit of the woods, and a guardian of country homes." "He's not a spirit. Spirits are souls without bodies, Casimir. The dead," Merchant's eyes darted to the corpse with the open skull, "are bodies without souls, and this little godling is the manifestation of this clearing, or perhaps the portion of this woods. No doubt we'll find his shrine somewhere nearby. So," he said to the creature, "a name?" "Call me Spindleshanks." "Like the mushroom?" Casimir inquired. "I didn't pick it. Ah!" The godling stood slowly. He was no larger than a child, with skin as red as blood and hair that was long, white and bushy, like bearded tooth fungus. His eyes were the largest Casimir had ever seen. They were the size of donuts, and they were looking him up and down in furious scrutiny. "You're a giant if ever I did see one. No wonder you threw that rock so hard. I tell you, I had enough blood in my mouth. I didn't need any more, but then I might be dead. I guess tasting another's blood is a pretty price to pay for the gift of living." He poked and prodded his ribs. "Perhaps you know my master, Rubizal. Why, that there is a miracle serum, and I know a thing or two about miracles." Merchant hid the nectar back in his satchel. "My gratitude." The godling pulled a knife no bigger than a grown man's pinky from his belt. It was made, it seemed, from a piece of sharpened quartz. He saluted. "You know Rubizal?" "Of course. That's why they had me captured. They tortured me. Ugh, they call him the Wild Hunt. You wonder why. Who knows what these old bastards could be doing if they put their minds to better use. They knew Rubizal had grown this entire forest, and therefore grew me in a sense. That's why they snatched me up as soon as they saw me. They suspected I was connected to him." Spindleshanks looked in all four directions. "You didn't happen to see a large hart with a saddle of leather limping about, did you?" he asked, looking at Casimir. "No, sadly. You steed?" "Yes. Goes by the name of Antlers. Antlers is a runt of a deer. Couldn't get a daughter mate with him, even if she died at his feet. In the rutting season, he runs off from my tree and comes back all bruised up and bloody. Then he dirties my wife's pond. I suppose there's no reason to wait around for him. He'd probably run back home with his tail between his legs. Not that it grows that long. A second godling. Your home must be beautiful if it can support two of you. Beautiful and private. Oh yes, very private. Wouldn't stay there otherwise. A tree needs to grow big and old before one of my kind could take up root in it. Why, it might be the prettiest tree in the land, except for rubizals, of course. Merchant looked longingly into the woods. What I would do to see such a home myself. Why then, I would like to cordially invite you, both, to my home for the night, as thanks for saving my life. It's getting dark, and he looked around in fear. The forest grows strange when Otak rests. Zarya will close the doors to heaven, and you know what she gets up to when it's dark. Spindleshanks lived at the bottom of a large Douglas fir that was wide enough for him plus two men if they hunched their backs. Casimir didn't know how the little godling managed to hollow out the inside, but the end result looked very cosy. Spindleshanks had carved windows into the bark, and a warm light illuminated the crisp lawn. The treehouse sat on the edge of a wide blue-green pool that was fed by a steady stream, and all around were other trees. There was a post for hitching mounts and a trough for drinking. All around the base of the tree were little shrines, tiny homes carved of stone. Some had toppled over, most had fallen victim to the elements. There was a weathered weariness to the stones, as well as a growth of moss and weeds. I like your shrines, said Casimir. Pilgrims, shouted Spindle. Well-meaning villagers from across the valley trek into the grove to pay their respects. We're but two of many godlings they pray to. They go all around the forest, stopping at old trees, rivers and hills to maintain the shrines. That one is my heart, he said, pointing to a large stone home that had sunk into the mud and was weighed down by a batch of spindleshank mushrooms. Don't tell anybody. If it breaks, I might, Poof! Spindleshanks ran into the holy clearing and yelled. Birdie? Birdie! I'm home! You won't believe who I saw! The small door that sat in the centre of the hollowed-out trunk was flung open. An orange-skinned godling in a dress of flowers came running out, her hair flying behind her and littering pieces of tawny leaf laurel. This godling had eyes that were big and white, like the moon. Casimir shivered. His mother once told him that eyes like that, with no discernible pupil, meant that a person had looked into the realm of death and lived. The moon-eyed godling held out her arms. Spindleshanks, where have you been? It's so late. And the books say somebody's died in the forest again. The flesh eaters are so full, but the men just keep dying. That's every day for 7 days. It's not right, I tell you. Spindleshanks raised his arms to show her the band. Mac would have had to take me too if it weren't for these kind men. What happened to my Spindleshanks? It was the wild hunt. The wild hunt, she gasped. That cannot be true. They've not been seen for hundreds of years. It's just as the Lady of the Woods said. She said the king would conjure up the wild hunt and send them into the woods to find her. She's a wise and powerful lady. I've not heard of prophecies coming true so quickly, but who am I to question her? I must tell her they've been sighted. And that I fought them, he called after her as she ran quickly back inside. And that they almost slayed you? How reckless. How will the master care for the entire woods without his helpers? Casimir and Merchant followed Spindleshanks to the threshold. Merchant looked through one warmly lit window, while Casimir got down on one knee to look through the other. Inside was a charming cottage, with handmade furniture and handmade candles. There was a working sink and a stove, blue pots and plates. There was a sizable pantry, filled to the top in brown paper packets and labelled in foreign script. On the far side trunk they could see a notice board of sorts, where the two godlings had pinned 100 species of insect by the wings. There were notes and diagrams and mathematical equations, as well as ominous symbols such as a skull and bones next to the ones with stingers. Jutting out of the wall near the fireplace was a brass pipe, like the elongated body of a tuba. Birdie placed her lips against the spout of the pipe and began whistling a song of various notes. Casimir looked about the clearing and the pond, but he could hear the song travelling from tree to tree and under the soil and away. It echoed through the space, till the birdsong faded. Can you hear that? Aye. I wonder how far the pipes go. I suspect all the way to Rubazal's lair. How many pipes do you think run through this place? Hundreds? Thousands? It looks natural, but when you know where to look... He motioned towards the board of knowledge, where the dissected insects were on a macabre display. It's industrialized. Inside, Birdie began undoing packs of food. Spindleshanks stuck his head out the door. What are you both doing outside? He asked. Merchant crawled inside comfortably, whereas Casimir had to get onto all fours. He scooched himself inside and bumped his head on the ceiling. Closer, Valuev, closer, hissed Artem, with all the entitlement and viciousness of a pampered house cat. He latched onto Valuev's wrist with his gauntleted hand, and the black iron of the old guard grated against each other, releasing a rusty, throaty screech. They wrestled. Valuev was a big, bald man with a supple, round chin. He looked like a big, wrinkled baby, even more so when his face bunched up on the verge of tears. But it smells so bad, he objected hoarsely. Valuev was always a little breathless, and always sounding older than he was. He was old, of course. But Artem knew that numbers of that nature only grew larger over time, even while the soul had the odd effect of shrinking, dwindling, till there was nothing left. Please, I can't stand it, moaned Valuev. But you have the lantern. I can't hold the lantern and prep for the grave now, can I? He yanked Valuev closer. A surprising feat of strength. Artem was by far the thinner, smaller man. Valuev stumbled forward, boots clanging loudly against themselves, and the light of the lantern flashed brightly across the bloody mess. The ruptured, eviscerated, coarsely textured, split-open skull of Camille. Some of the light reflected off the surface of his exposed eyeballs. He's only been dead for a few hours. Putrefaction is just going underway. It gets much worse. How did you survive all these years, if you can't stand the smell of the dead? My helmet is snub-nosed. I can fill the space with a pouch of medicinal herbs. It keeps the rot and the ghouls away. On cue, Valuev produced a small piece of gauze filled with a bulb of mixed herbs. He pressed the purifying potpourri to his nose and inhaled deeply. By the gods... Artem tucked a branch under the ligature that connected the neck to the devastated chin. He gave the open sack of bone flesh a nudge. They really did a number on old Camille. You know how many battles he survived? People keep telling me, and yet I keep forgetting. Whatever it is, he won't survive anymore. Might give us an opportunity to beat the number. Is that what you wanted? To beat the number? I don't know what I want anymore. I don't care. I'm too old to care. Nonsense. How old are you anyways? 132? I don't recall feeling so nihilistic at that age. It's not fun anymore. There are fewer and fewer of us. We grow older while some of our children die of rotten lungs. I want to hurry up and get so old I can't move. But I wake every morning as spry as I was when I was 110. Don't make me salivate. I'm not as spry as I used to be. My lungs and my legs struggle to keep up. It's not fair. I've had twice the life of most men, and still I want more. What can I say? He sighed, while still playing with Camille's brain. There's no pleasing us. Right. His head is near clean off, and his skull is in so many pieces it'll be impossible to put him back together. Even if we were to send him back into Mutka's domain, he will be unidentifiable. But what about the signet ring and the ring of the old guard? Anyone can steal rings, Valuev. As if to prove his point, Artem wrenched the two rings from the corpse's bloated fingers. One was black and rusty, the other gold, with the ruby and Camille's family name crawling across the band. He held the two rings up to the light for Artem to see. Understand? So what do we do with him? We let the bugs eat him. But he can't go to heaven that way. No. Instead, he will join Mutka's body and become part of her. Artem stood up with a creak and stretched his back. Besides, let's be honest. He isn't going to heaven, is he? Better this way. Which way do the Godling's prince lead? That way, pointed Valuev. Let's march through the night. Maybe we'll catch them while they're sleeping. Casimir was so large he took up at least a third of the home. His back was hunched, his beard, now a little rougher than usual, was tucked between his knees. His big, hairy hands were holding onto a small cup from which he sipped soup. It was good soup. It was almost enough to keep his attention from the fact that one of his cheeks was being superheated by the fire, while the other was pressed up against the cold, damp bark. The bolt came out of nowhere, Birdie. I was riding along on Antlers, minding my own business, when it lands on a felled tree. Antlers, being the coward that he is, rears up and bolts. He hasn't realised that I've fallen right off my saddle. I called him back, but he just kept on running. I've told you 100 times to get a different herd to ride on. No. The deer in this forest are unusually large. I think it's the magic of the giant. Can't sit astride them comfortably. More like you're shorter than the usual Godling. I'm not. You take that back. I can't. I'd be a liar if I did. On with your story then. Well, I turn my head, and what do I see? Some of the oldest, cruelest, meanest looking hussars I ever did see. With hair as white as coarse salt. Tall and broad, but not as tall as Casimir here, except for that one monster, Johann. You heard them say his name? Heard them say it. He introduced himself to me just before picking me up and slamming me on the ground. He didn't, said Casimir in awe, who had somehow ended up as enthralled with the story as Birdie was. Merchant chuckled into his cup. He likes to talk him, but it was just as the Lady of the Woods said it would be. Elder riders of black iron and white hair, led by their proxy king Johann. Birdie became quiet, less jovial. They didn't hurt you much, did they? Spindleshanks rubbed his chin and put on a very grave voice. Yes, they did. Look at my ribs. That's all the evidence you need. All because I refused to tell them where my master was. It was only going to get worse, you know. They were talking about ripping my fingernails off. Oh, stop. I'm serious. I was going to die, Birdie, until these two fine heroes showed up. Casimir wound up his sling, and it sounded like the fanning of wasp wings. Whew! The rock flew, and the head of Johann, I don't think it was Johann, the head of the hussar called Camille, burst open. Blood rained into my nose and mouth. My ribs break. Johann flees. Merchant performs a miracle, and here we are. Don't fret, Birdie. What matters is I'm safe and home. Birdie's face dropped into a furious glare. You made sure to cover your tracks, didn't you? Excuse me? You made sure to cover your tracks, didn't you? Cover my tracks? Spindleshanks! Birdie leapt to her feet. She ran to her pantry and grabbed a bag. What if you let them right here? What if they wreck the shrines? Birdie burst through the door into the open night. Casimir followed after her on all fours, partly to assure her of his protection, partly to relieve his burning hot glute. I'd help protect your home, Birdie. I'm sure you're very strong, Casimir, but I can't rely on you to protect this house. Stand back. Birdie opened the pack and grabbed her handful of salt and something else. She walked to the furthest shrine, which sat just in front of her pond, and began pouring the salt mixture on the ground. She then began tracing a large, wide circle. Merchant scrambled through the door. Are you making a protective circle, Birdie? Is this druidic magic, or... Not at all, Merchant. This is my magic. What mix is this? He asked excitedly. Salt and giant hogweed. Hogweed? But you're touching it with your fingers. It won't harm me, Merchant, she said from behind the tree. Why'd you mix your salt with hogweed? Because, said Spindleshanks, it causes blindness. The salt preserves us and keeps evil at bay. The hogweed will cause blindness to those who would do us harm. Birdie reappeared on the other side of the tree. She was using a lot of salt mix to make this wood. It means evildoers cannot pass the threshold, and furthermore, They won't be able to see what lies within the circle. Birdie completed the circle of salt and hogweed. As the lines met and the circle was complete, the salt flashed a hot colour and burned away till all that was left was a clean blue line. The line glowed brightly. Birdie looked out into the trees, which at that moment must have seemed like monsters. They're out there, the hunt. They're in the trees. At least this way, they'll not be able to find us. Birdie made a fire of ash and hazel and let the branches and logs burn long, till the fire really took. Merchant snored in one corner, while Spindleshanks was unconscious in his mesh-draped cot. One of his skinny red legs dangled over the side. Casimir had been given the most room, but even then he had to fall asleep sitting up, which was difficult to do. I've invaded your home and brought chaos. I'm sorry, Birdie. Don't be silly. Spindleshanks the one that brought the chaos, as he often does. In fact, you may be one of the better things he's dragged back to our home. You saved his life, and for that, I'm thankful. I'm almost persuaded to guide you to the Lady of the Woods. Is the fire hot enough? It's lovely. That's good. Ash is a tree that came from the Sarthans. They say they also brought hazel, but that fact is contested. They say in the world they left, the god of medicine and his staff made of hazel, and that it was an ash tree that held the world together with its branches. Their wood makes for powerful fires. The ash will protect us from demons, and the hazel will clear our minds. Salt, hogweed, ash, and hazel. We should be well guarded, at least till the sun comes up and the wind blows the last of the smoke away. Where do you think the smoke will go? I don't know. Hopefully to somebody who deserves protecting. Birdie, who is the Lady of the Woods? There was a time when she changed with the seasons. Brides would walk into the woods who best matched the mood of the trees. Then the lady changed but once every 100 years or so. These days, there is no Lady of the Woods, but one arrived recently. Spindleshanks was never happier. His father and his father's father had to tend to the forest without the guidance of a lady. Spindleshanks thinks he's lucky. I suppose he is. He believes she's got the seer's gift. Birdie frowned sceptically. Me, I never heard of no prophecy coming true so quick, but that matters no. I'll answer to her, if the master thinks she's worthy. The fire brightened and the log cracked. Casimir listened close and imagined Katarzyna in his mind. What did she foresee? That her coming would mark the return of the wild hunt. That's no foresight. Johan is old, and there's surely something strange about him, but he is no huntsman. That's just a name he's stolen. As for seeing the future, that's Princess Katarzyna knowing how much trouble she started by running away from home. I told her, don't go to Rubazal's forest. Think of all the men who'll be sent in after you into the country of the gods. Well, perhaps she knows something we don't. It cannot be denied that when winter comes, many things die, Casimir. And in spring, 100 eggs are wounded for every one ram who gives his life on the path of fatherhood. The seasons do not change without taking payment. She's brought her pay and then some. Go to sleep, Casimir. I'll pray and tend to the fire. I want to stay up and talk. Go to sleep. I'm tired of your blathering. Casimir chuckled. He closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Casimir left the tree home in the morning. There was gunk in his eyes, and spit had made one side of his beard crusty. He needed to wash. Outside, the sun peeked through the trees and hit the water at a soft angle. It did not reach the salt-hallowed circle of land they were occupying, and so the large fir behind him was wreathed in cool shade. Casimir passed some of the old shrines. The pool sat just outside the protective circle. He looked at the circle wearily. Come on, Casimir. You're going to have to leave this place anyways. Who's going to find you now? You'll be miles from this place before you bump into the old guard again. For whatever reason, Casimir did not want to leave the circle. Luckily, he was a huge man. He got down onto his knees and reached over the line enough to dip his hands into the pond. He retracted his hands and washed his face and repeated the action till his skin and beard felt fresh. He dipped his hands again, this time wanting to scrub his pits, when two figures came striding boldly into the godling's clearing. Casimir startled back in a jerk of motion. The two men were clad in black iron and had hair as white as early snow. "They've found us!" yelled Casimir. Then he clasped his hands around his mouth. "Idiot!" he thought to himself. The two old hussars had appeared so suddenly that Casimir had forgotten they could not see him. "What was that?" asked Artem, as both men froze, his wobbly chin trembling as he spoke. "I don't know. It sounded almost like a man, but it was hollow." "A ghost? Ghosts often try to speak to the living." Valuev did a pass of the terrain, an empty bog as far as he was concerned. But places, just as much as men and monsters, could surprise you. He dropped his crossbow to the ground and began the laborious process of winding up a bolt. Casimir could hear the churning and whirring of the winch throughout the clearing. He watched the fat hussar strain with effort. The door creaked open behind him. He felt soft footsteps. It was Birdie. "You're lucky, Casimir," she whispered. "Your voice has been muffled by all the magic, like speaking through a brick wall it is, but I'd not intended to make them deaf." Casimir felt her little childlike hands wrap around his fingers. She urged him back towards the tree. "Let's go back inside. They'll go eventually." Casimir did not budge. "What if they don't? Birdie, go back inside and get me my sling, and if you have any heavy rocks, bring them to me." "There it is again." Artem stepped back and drew his hand-and-a-half sword with practiced urgency. The sword was 20 or so inches of cold steel. It glinted viciously in the daylight. Casimir felt Birdie's hands stiffen, as though she had looked into the eyes of the basilisk and turned to stone in his hands. "I bet a good clean sword like that one could cut through my magic like butter. Let's go back, Casimir," she urged. On the other side of the pond, Valuev raised a pacifying hand. "Be calm, Artem." He raised his crossbow into the ostensibly empty clearing. His eyes were alert, his body tense like a rope dried with sea salt. He looked around and then stepped towards the pond. "Perhaps the voice is coming from the water," he said, bending his neck to look into the depths. "Valuev, be careful. It might not be spirits. Might be the man who killed Camille. His band might be around the corner, behind the trees. Their footsteps go into the pond and disappear. They're probably nearby." Valuev continued into the pond. The water sloshed around his boots. Casimir could hear them squelching into the mud. Valuev looked right into Casimir's eyes, but he did not show any indication of actually seeing him. He came even closer, almost covered the length of the entire pond, was almost upon them and the hallowed circle. Then he stopped. His nose curled up. "Something smells awful here. My eyes are burning." He rubbed his eyes with his fingers. "By the gods, it's like being at home when the girls make stew. So many onions." "Get away from there, Valuev. There's probably some noxious gas you can't see. It's probably coming from the ground or from the mushrooms. I hate mushrooms. Get back." Valuev, for once, did as he was told. Casimir finally let Birdie guide him back to the tree home. Merchant and Spindleshanks were at the door. Merchant and Casimir traded warning glances, and Merchant passed along Casimir's sling when they were close enough. "The hunt?" "Yes, looks like they're leaving. I could kill them now. They wouldn't expect it." Casimir sounded unsure of his words. "Really? Has one death made you so cold?" Casimir did not reply. "Even if you could, Casimir, I'd prefer we didn't fight them now. Now when they're so close to our shrines, our hearts. I don't know if Birdie and I would survive a fight with them. Not if one escaped and they all came back with torches." "But they've turned their backs to us. They wouldn't even know what hit them." Casimir found 2 rocks and slotted one into the pad of his sling. The 2 hussars were heading back into the trees, but he still had a clear shot. Casimir knew all he had to do was sling one stone as hard and as true as he could. It would fly through the air uncontested and slam into the backs of their heads. Their helmets would burst into pieces, their heads would flower open, as did the man's whose name was Camille. "You can do it, Casimir. You can kill them. You've killed before, so this should be easy. Artem passed into the shade of distant trees. They were almost free of the clearing. Come on, you can do it! Casimir raised his throwing arm, felt the leather of his sling respond to the impetus of his itchy fingers. The rock was ready. Valuev caught up to Artem. The two hussars were tired of marching and searching. The footprints they'd found were dry and disappeared back at the bog they'd just discovered. They were not sure the trail ended there, but they were sure going ahead alone was a bad idea. Something wasn't right. Artem picked up his pace. In fact, he almost jaunted. We really avoided something bad back there, he smiled. I can feel it in my bones. Really? Do you think so? I can't imagine what could have gone wrong. Ah! He howled. Valuev? Cried Artem. What happened? I only bloody rolled over my ankle. In all this plate too. Oh, it hurts! Casimir let his arm go limp. The rock fell to the grass. His quarry was gone. He felt Merchant's hands on his back. Good man, Casimir. It's a brave thing not to kill, you know. Life will force our hands in the most unpleasant ways, and that is bad enough. No reason to do fate's work for her. But what if they return? What if they come back and we aren't here? We'll leave fresh tracks as we travel, and I'm sure Birdie has more tricks up her sleeve. Isn't that right, Birdie? I have a few. You hear that, Casimir? You made the right choice. Why don't you both head back inside and replenish your supplies, said Spindleshanks. You should probably be on your way soon. The brush on the other side of the pond rustled alarmingly. Casimir plucked his fallen rock again. Just as he was ready to dash his stone at whatever man showed himself, he saw the brush part. A red-haired buck with dismal-looking antlers came limping into view. It had a well-worn saddle around its torso, and a quiver that was mostly empty of arrows. He looked right through the magic of the circle and froze when it saw Casimir's foreign face. Antlers? Antlers, you stupid old runt. Come here. Epilogue. Dear Casimir, make sure you eat the bread I gave you. It'll keep you strong. I wrote this letter so you wouldn't forget my instructions. Follow the river till you find the entrance to Rubizal's waterworks. It's a large gate in an underground cavern of stone, and the water that runs through it is as green as emerald, as hot as a cup of tea. It's full of all sorts of remedies and magical elements. Some of it I'm sure is great for one's health, but try not to drink it. It's for plants and wild beasts, unless you want your beards to dangle below your testicles. All the tunnels lead back to the heart of the forest. That's where you'll find Rubizal's garden. It's also where you'll find the Lady of the Woods, Katarzyna. And it might be where you'll find your brother. I hope leading you to them is the right thing to do. Birdie.